to executives about security, or we're going to talk about talking, kind of like business folks have meetings about having meetings. There's going to be a lot of that. So if you wanted to attend another session, this is your last opportunity before we lock the doors. A little bit of housekeeping. If your neighbor starts dozing off, please catch them so they don't fall on the floor. And we'll go ahead and get started. I said everybody was coming in, and then people came. All right, so introductions to begin with. My name is Harlen, Compton. There's some stuff in the brochure we passed around with the speaker bios, with credentials and all of that. Here in this crowd, I don't know that anybody cares too much about those. A little bit about me, beyond being a security professional, or enthusiast, as I like to say. I'm a bad sci-fi junkie. I spend a lot of time watching those awful, awful low-budget films on the Sci-Fi Channel late at night. I love them. I don't know why. I've been a Fedora fanboy, so the Linux distribution, also the hat, but mostly Linux, since about version 1. Also, the guy, if you're a developer of any kind, I'm probably that guy that you're constantly rejecting pull requests from on GitHub. I was a developer in a former life. I think I ended up doing something different because I maybe wasn't good at it. I don't know. I just want to know who's here and why you keep rejecting my pull requests. I work really hard on that code. Also an attorney, and I'm desperately still trying to be cool. So underneath of this suit, my lawyer costume, there are blue jeans and a hoodie, and I'm still doing cool things. Linux is still cool. All of this is still true in my head. So that's basically me. And now for what you came for, I'm going to open up with a story from my week. So I had just finished a meeting where we sat down with project managers, budget folks, some sales reps from an encryption company. One of the big things that we're doing, my place of employment, discussing implementing encryption in some places where we don't have it. Out of this meeting, turns out the numbers are going to be way more than we thought they were, both in terms of finances and resources that will be needed and timelines. So I go up to the fancy wood-paneled office where the chief technology officer resides. He's an important guy at a software company. I know in most companies he's kind of a side figure, but here he's the big executive. I sit down and I lay the news out for him, and I'm waiting for the blowback. Instead I hear, you know, Harlan, that's what we have to do. Security, I've seen it in the news, it's very important. We're going to reallocate some resources. We're going to get over with accounting and make sure that we can get this paid for, and we're going to get started right away. So I'm thinking, sales team's not going to be happy about this. There's a whole host of new features that were supposed to be coming in the next few sprints that aren't going to make it. So, sir, I say, what about these upcoming features? What about the sales team? He says, don't worry about the sales team. I'll take care of them. Protecting the data that we're hosting, people's private information, is the most important thing we do. We'll take care of it. And I thought, as I walked out of his office, that I've arrived in my career, that everything I'm about to tell you today will help you, too, have that scenario play out in your own life. So I'm assuming everybody here would like to know how to do that. Well, so would I, because the next thing that happened is my alarm went off. I spend all of my time dreaming about this stuff because it's hard. It's really, really hard to communicate technical problems to business people. I think you all know that. That's hopefully why you're here, and not because you just didn't like the other three guys. So that does raise the question, though, of these data breaches the past few years. They've been all over the news. Millions of people have been compromised, identity theft issues, lawsuits flying everywhere, executives having their faces in the papers in the ways they didn't want them to be there. And so the business leaders that we all work with, they're scared, and they probably should be. And I see this as a good thing. It's a wake-up call. If your organization's anything like ours, security is getting a lot of attention. Sometimes it seems like lip service, but attention from the folks up top. So if that's the case, why is it then that we never seem to get anywhere? Is it Is it because IT, we're just viewed as part of IT, and IT is a cost sink, and everything that deals with IT is behind schedule and over budget? So business leaders tend to write off IT as long as they can. It could be, but I don't think so. Maybe it's because the security measures we want to put in place, the controls we want to implement, are a pain in the neck. They get in the way of customer service. They get in the way of closing sales. They get in the way of delivering features. Whatever it is that your business does, it always seems like security is another hurdle that's getting in the way, and business doesn't like hurdles in the way of making money. It could be that, but I tend to look over at other areas of the business. So let's take the legal department. So the attorneys over there are constantly cranking out just volumes of new contracts, new forms, new language to be reviewed. Every time you hire a new employee, they have to go over the 600-page non-disclosure agreements, the non-competes. Every time you want to close a deal with a customer, there's all the contract haggling that has to happen. New vendors are the same way. I would say the legal department has a huge problem with being a stumbling block, but yet it seems that the stuff they need to get done ends up getting done. You could say the same thing about the accounting department, maybe not so much sales because they're making money, so they get what they want because they make money. But I think it's because we are speaking different languages. Not just from a technologist to a business standpoint, which tends to be the cliche, is they just don't understand the technology problem, so they don't want to spend the money. It truly is just two completely different modes of thinking, which is what I'm going to elaborate on here. So the first thing that comes up when security people talk to executives, you see this all the time, I see it a lot, and it seems to be the obvious approach. So all of these data breaches have been in the news. If you need to get funding out of the budget, you need to get something implemented, you need to get resources, why not point to those data breaches and try to excite, shall we say, business leaders into playing ball, into paying attention, helping you to do what you need to do. The problem with that is kind of like the boy that cried wolf story. So we spend too much time relying on fear, uncertainty, and doubt because it's really easy to do. This stuff is scary. The thought of a data breach where I work, I mean, that's a world-ending scenario. We're all unemployed after that. Because no one's going to use our software, the sales pipeline is going to grind to a halt, and I'm going to be waiting in the unemployment office, I suppose. So it is very important. So how do you avoid creating the appearance of fear, uncertainty, and doubt is what we'll get to next. Because if you don't think about that, if you don't try to be reasonable, try to be just matter of fact with the way you're explaining this to executives, what's going to happen is you're going to become the squeaky wheel, which has happened to all of us at some point, and you're going to be the guy or the lady that just gets ignored. And business leaders are going to turn to alternative voices to find out what they actually need to do to protect them from a liability standpoint. And when that happens, who do they turn to? If it's not the security leaders in the company, then they turn to the legal department. They turn to the chief financial officer. They turn to regulatory bodies. And what you end up with when that happens is what all too many of our organizations find ourselves with, which is a pure compliance program. Because everyone knows if you need to do something to meet regulatory compliance, it's a lot easier to sell that. But regulatory compliance doesn't always get you any real security. And so too many businesses languish in this world, in my big red circle here. Red's bad. Just if it's not to do with HIPAA or PCI DSS or NIST or whatever compliance framework you might be under, it becomes a very difficult sell. So we got to speak the language of executives, of business leaders, in order to persuade them to see the issue the way we see it. And we're not going to do that with technical details. We're not going to do that with, look, here's how easy it is to exploit these vulnerabilities. You're not really going to be able to do it with vulnerability scanning reports and maybe even auditors, depending on the business, until you can translate that into the language that business people understand. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of this language. I don't know it very well, but I know a few keywords. The most important of those is risk. Business is risk. All business is risk. You go into business, you're taking a risk. You think you're going to make money, you could end up homeless. Hopefully, if you're a business that wants to stay in business, it's a managed, minimized, mitigated risk. But that's what the practice of business is. So business leaders, their bread and butter is risk to the business. What's my risk to reward ratio? What am I risking this amount of money for to make this amount of money? Am I going to spend $100,000 to land a client who may only bring me 50 grand in revenue? No. But am I going to risk wasting 10 grand to land $1 million client? Probably. So it's not difficult, it's just different from the way that we as technical people normally think. So the first step when you approach an executive, whether it's in a meeting or an email, however it is you get in contact with them, the first thing you want to do is start off the conversation with what you need. And by that, I don't mean show up with an invoice in your hand or with a price estimate, because that's not really going to get you anywhere either. You don't want to be the squeaky wheel. You also don't want to be the money pit. Think about it this way. If you're a CXO of some sort, of any decent-sized organization, what is it that you do on a daily basis? What is your job function? Well, politics, yes, but officially, what's your job function? You make decisions, right? Like you're the decider. It's George Bush, I'm the decider, right? So you got to give an executive a decision to make. If you're just coming to an executive to say, hey, here's a problem I have, I need you to solve it for me, or hey, here's a solution that we really, really want, and here's how much it's going to cost, I need you to sign this check for me, executive's not making a decision, right? You're just saying, sign a check, or solve this for me, which is an issue they probably don't understand. What you do instead is you come to that business leader and say, here's a problem, here are the different solutions that we've come up with, and the risks and the costs associated with each one of those. There we go. So I like to say dollars and cents, like S-E-N-S-E. It's an old cliche because I'm still trying to be funny and cool. You guys can laugh a little. You want to frame it in that context, and then put it on the table of the business leader to decide. Now, if you're really crafty, somebody mentioned politics earlier, so maybe you know where I'm about to go with this. If you're really crafty, you can frame that in such a way that the decision is really kind of already made, because there's really only one decision that could realistically be made. The trick is letting the executive be the one to make that decision. Maybe they have an importance complex, or maybe they're very attached to the business because they have a lot more at stake than we do as employees. Could be a lot of reasons. All I know is it works. Unfortunately, I'm not done with that. The other point is when you deliver that decision to be made, you also have to commit to results. And that's something that we as technology people, a lot of us, I used to not be so comfortable with doing that. We tend to speak in generalizations, like this should improve our defenses on the perimeter and prevent these kind of attacks, or hypothetically this will do that. We speak in broad terms without making any kind of commitments. Part of the solutions you have to offer in order for a business leader to make a decision is, hey boss, if we do this thing, here's what will happen. And you have to put some accountability on the line, which isn't always easy, especially if you're afraid you might be wrong. But when you do that, you also tend to get better results, especially if you follow through with that accountability. And it seems fair, right? You're asking the executive to make a decision and be accountable. So whatever it is they decide, we should be accountable for what we said the results would be. Sometimes the answer to that still is no, we can't do it. Especially if it's an expensive, fun security toy, like some of our vendors have out here. You take their business cards back, you call them, you do the sales demos, you're sold, but never feel like you're going to get the line item in the budget to ever really see them outside of this conference every year. And that's because, as a business leader, try to put yourselves in their shoes, and I know it's really hard because I struggle with this every day. You tend to look at security like insurance. So when you're spending on security dollars, you're trying to protect yourself against a potential risk. Just like the insurance that the office carries on its equipment, its computers, the insurance that we have for workers' compensation, insurance that you buy for your car or house. You buy it for one of two reasons. The first of which is a loss, no matter how small the risk. If that risk is realized, would be world-ending for you. So for most of us, we buy homeowners insurance because if we lose our house, we can't replace that. We need the insurance. Not likely, but it would be just a world-ending loss. The other reason is because the expected loss costs more than what the insurance cost would be. So this is the lens you have to look through when you're trying to make your case to executives about why we need one of the shiny toys out here. Is to realize they're thinking of it as insurance. Sometimes still, they'll disagree that even still, with the case you laid out, the risk that I see of this bad event happening is still not worth what it's going to cost for me to prevent it from happening. Especially when you're in some of those six-figure pieces of software. Part of why we're still at a disagreement at this point is because of the two different modes of thinking that we as security professionals versus business leaders are going to have. We tend to approach things in a very tactical manner. For most of us, our day-to-day life is spent putting out fires. Something's on fire today, it's going to be something different tomorrow. Security incidents pop up, we got to do the investigation. There's vulnerability scans that come back, you got to do the mitigating results, you got to go talk to the patching folks, make sure they're up to speed. And that's our day-to-day world, and we tend to view a security breach or a bad security incident as another giant fire that we're trying to prevent. Business leaders, on the other hand, they're inherently strategic in their thinking. They're, at least if it's a well-run business, which I know that's not the case everywhere, business leaders are focused on what are we going to be doing tomorrow, next month, 6 months from now, 5 years from now. Thinking in a longer-term context where that security incident, that security breach that we're so worried about, that we feel that we need whatever this thing is to prevent it from happening, when you're looking at it on their time scale, maybe the business leader you're trying to communicate with doesn't see it as big of a fire as you do in the grand scheme. So there's still some ways to do some persuasion even in this context. If you're still getting no after you've laid out the case in dollars and cents, if you're still getting no after everything we've talked about up till now, but you're convinced that you know this is something that your organization really needs, then there's another thing to examine here, which is human tendency towards risk avoidance and loss aversion. This is fun. I really like this, actually. So Peter Dyack, I can never pronounce his last name, big guy with the X Prize Foundation, always talked about risk aversion is what really hampers human progress. He beats on that drum all the time. I don't know if you really care about him. Anyway, what this concept that I'm about to go into is that human beings, just evolutionarily, emotionally, whatever the reason may be, most of us tend to create a much deeper emotional attachment to loss than we do to gains. You see this all the time in the stock markets or in the casinos, where you'll have that individual who maybe they bought the stock thinking it was going to go up, and it starts to take a downturn, and they just keep holding on to it. They keep holding on to it because it's going to turn around. It's going to turn around, and it never does. And they lost everything. And you think, why didn't you cut your losses on that and just let it go and make money another day? But emotionally, when it's your money on the line, it's really hard to do that. Same thing in the casino. A lot of us tend to not think about realizing a loss until we've cashed out our chips. So if we start running down, you just keep spending more money, thinking there's a possibility I'm going to make this back. I'm going to make this back. And most of the time you never do, right? There's a lot of us that leave the boat broke. I leave my wallet in the car for that reason. So let's take a scenario here. If you had to choose one of these two options, which would it be? And the first option is that you want a door prize. It's $5,000. You can take your check for $5,000. You can leave right now and go put it in the bank. Or you could stay here with us and take a chance when we roll out the big pinwheel later and spin it. And you get a 50-50 chance of walking out of here with $10,000 instead of the 5. Of course, there's also a 50-50 chance that you're just going to leave broke. So, how many of you would take the first option in this scenario? $5,000 in your pocket right now. What about the second? Who's our risky folks? Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, just a moment.
Yep.
Dave, what's he? See?
No problem. Let's flip this scenario on its head, however, and let's look at it a different way. So option 1, you've been fined $5,000 by the FCC because of some potty language you used on Facebook. You got to pay the fine today. So you get your checkbook out, you can write the check, you can leave it here, and you can go on your way. Or we can bring out the wheel again. I like to call this the wheel of federal revenue. You can give that old wheel a spin, and there's a 50-50 chance that that fine will get waived and you won't owe anything. There's also a 50-50 chance that you could end up owing $10,000 instead of 5. So who'd go with option 1? And option 2.
What about the lawyers?
We don't like lawyers in here. So
they're involved in that equation. They weren't in the first one.
Yeah, that's true. So where we're going here is in either case, we're talking about the same amount of money in both of these scenarios. Either you're spending $5,000, you have $5,000, still it's $5,000. You're still talking about a 50-50 shot at $10,000, whether it's a loss or gain, so an extra 5. Where the theory I'm going at here goes is that we are much more likely to lock in gains early in investment terms. You start to make a little money, or in the business cases we'll get back to in a moment, you tend to take things as quickly as you can when there's profit. Just human tendencies. Whereas if you're suffering a loss, you don't have to realize or feel that loss until it actually happens. So and this played out, I don't know if you guys in the front can see the people behind you, but in the first scenario, the vast majority of us said option 1. Rather have money in my pocket than a chance of nothing. Perfectly consistent. But on the second option, most of us went with choice number 2, which was we'd like to take the 50-50 shot of avoiding that loss. So when you look at it like this, so again, put yourself back in the business leader's shoes, going back to make your case one last time for why we need to buy one of our vendors' products. Are there any CISSPs in here? I figured there'd be a few. So all of you are intimately familiar with these letters up here on the screen, the ALE, SLE, ARO, and all those fun things. What this is the annual loss expectancy is equal to the single loss expectancy times the annual rate of return. So what you have to do to make your case the last time is you have to put some dollar figures on stuff. You have to put the dollar figure on the event that you're worried about happening. What's it going to cost the business should this happen? You have to put a likelihood factor on how likely do I think this is to occur before we purchase one of our vendors' products or after. And then you multiply those two together, and what you get is what you expect to lose annually from this particular security incident or this particular thing happening. And you get a dollar amount. So that's what it costs. So let's say you've got, you talk about physical security, you want to buy something to better secure the perimeter around your data center. And you're worried about somebody walking off with a server that for some reason you just left freestanding on the floor because people still have tower servers. And it's really easy to just pick up and walk out with it's a $10,000 piece of equipment, but there's only a 5% chance that somebody's going to walk out with that. Every year, you think there's a 5% chance. So what that would mean is annually, your expected loss, your annual loss expectancy on that server would be 5% of $10,000 or $500. So if the cage or the lock or whatever it is you want to put in the data center costs less than $500 a year, you've made a very compelling case that this is an investment. You're showing it to the business leader as what we're actually doing here is saving money. By spending this money now, based on these numbers, we're going to save it. Otherwise, the human tendency for that executive, and this may still be where their frame of mind is paying for that security product, paying for that control, whatever it is, that's going to cost the business money. That's a loss I have to realize right now. But there's a chance that whatever boogeyman it is that you're talking about isn't ever going to happen. So maybe I'm going to take that chance because I don't want to realize that loss. It's that same casino type thinking we just went through with the spinning wheels. So what you have to do is get them out of that mindset. Show that this is a cost savings. And for those of you who've done the CISSP program or something like it, you also know that if you can't make this argument, maybe we're the ones in the wrong and we don't actually need it as bad as we think we do. Because when a security or business leader decides to accept the risk, we're all security people. A lot of us guard people's private information. We safeguard financial information, whatever information may be. To a lot of us, accepting the risk to save some money, it's borderline unethical. For some of us, it's absolutely unethical, and you just can't let it go. But we have to realize that security is not the only risk. Remember back to the beginning, business is risk. So that business leader you're talking to, you're not the only person who's coming to her with his hands out saying, I need a check, we really need this is a crisis. And it's difficult sometimes because, again, we're seeing in our little world, our big world, it's a big scary world, it's hard to see outside of that. We just want to protect the data. That's what we were hired to do. They're not giving us the money. How are we going to protect the data? Sometimes it's not worth protecting. Just from that risk standpoint from the business. If the business can absorb the cost of that risk easier than it can absorb the cost of mitigating it, then you're never going to get anywhere. You can make all the slideshows, you can bring up all the FUD, you can send your CEO news stories every day when this happens to some other company. You're never going to get anywhere because if it happens, the loss from that event is smaller than what it's going to cost me to mitigate. And that's just business. And it's hard to deal with our ethical dilemmas with that because I have them too. But until you can do that, we're never going to get anywhere in this argument. But the other point here, and this is the last resort. So this is after you've gone in the first time, you made your case clearly, it didn't work. You did the second time the way we did. Third time, you came in with the numbers and the probabilities and showed it was a savings. Decision still, we're going to accept the risk. You haven't completely lost the war, just the battle. So the next step here is to hold that business leader, hold that decision maker accountable. Because that's what you asked them to do, right? Business leaders make decisions. You asked for a decision, you got one. You didn't make the decision, so why should we live with the accountability for that decision? That's why the guy upstairs gets paid the big bucks and us not so much. So the first point there is that you have to document. You need to keep records of the risk you identified, the proposal that you made, the numbers that you put together, the correspondence from the executive where they said, here's why we're not going to do it if they bothered explaining it to you. Sometimes in our world, they don't bother. It's just no. That's okay. It's their business. They pay us. They don't want to do it. But you have to document this. Otherwise, when that unthinkable event happens, and somebody comes to you and they say, Harlen, why didn't you buy the thing from the vendor at the conference? And hey, sir, I tried. And you said no. You didn't make a clear enough case. You didn't. Somehow it's going to fall on you, and you're going to be the person walking out without a job or without the promotion or whatever it may be. So you have to keep this kind of documentation. Also, I know everybody's doing their annual risk assessments, right? Everybody nod and say yes. I don't want to know otherwise. It's not my business. But every year, annually, we all know we should be taking a risk inventory from a security standpoint in our organization. You look over everything, you determine where your risk points are, what mitigating controls you've put around them. Well, this documentation is part of that risk assessment. That, hey, we've identified a risk here, here's the information we have about it, here are the controls we've adapted, which, by the way, you should, even if we can't get the shiny product from the hallway, there's still other things we can try to do to mitigate the risk. And as security professionals, that's still our job. Even when we get told no, close the hole the best we can. Whatever bit of the hole is left goes in the risk assessment. If you're a somewhat large organization, that risk assessment finds its way to the chief financial officer or it finds its way to the general counsel's office. And if you think business leaders talk risk all the time and that's their language, you haven't seen anything until you talk to the lawyers. And so when they see that, they may have an entirely different opinion than the CEO, and a lot of times you could say the exact same thing to the CEO, you get a no. When the company attorney comes in and says, hey, if you don't do this, you're getting sued and awful things are happening, watch how quick the mind changes. So you may not have lost the war, you keep waging the war, you just lost the battle. So you hold that decision maker accountable. You keep the records, tell people when the auditors come in, if anybody does SSAE audits or other independent third-party audits, if depending on what the risk item is, I'm not saying you should throw your company under the bus, but also don't hide the ball. If they find it, explain it. It gets documented. Maybe customers see it. So maybe you're not the only one that thinks this is important. Then again, maybe we are. And that's kind of what I'm getting at in this whole thing, is we have to take the time to put on the executive hat and think about what are they thinking? Why can't I get this funding? Let's see. The worst case scenario, and this one's my personal favorite, and when I say that, it's in this malicious hand-wringing, like, I like to watch it on TV, I don't like when it happens to me kind of ways, which is what I call decision dodgeball. This happens if you've done everything that we talked about before. There's a decent probability that the decision maker is going to hide behind the bureaucracy. Why do businesses develop bureaucracy? Anybody know the core reason why bureaucracy tends to grow up around the business? It's to avoid accountability, right? Same stuff we were talking about at the beginning. Bureaucracy shields people from being accountable. So decision makers may try to hide behind the bureaucracy and not give you an answer, or drag it out forever and hope that they can just keep putting you off. So that could be you submit your request for capital budgeting if your organization does that, and then when the budget comes back, it's just mysteriously gone, and that committee in the boardroom struck it out, but no one said why or who did it. It could be that they just keep rescheduling meetings or not answering emails. Because they realize if this is what's happening, then again, back to the insurance idea, that business leader knows that this is insurance, you've made a good case. They don't want to put their name on the decision to say no, but they also don't want to spend the money. They don't want to be the person who the house burns down and their signature is on the waiver form for homeowners insurance saying, I don't want it. Nobody wants to be that person. So the only way to get around this, I don't really have much in the way of good advice here, other than be persistent, be firm, don't be a jerk. And that should go without saying in all of this, is don't be a jerk. So you bring it up when it's relevant. So when you're talking to auditors, when you're talking to legal, whoever, don't bring it up all the time. Don't badger the lady over the head with it every time you see her in the hallway, because then you're going to get put in that box and be that guy again. Same person I said you don't want to be at the beginning. The other thing I like to do is you have allies that you may not know about elsewhere in the organization. We talked a little bit about legal, who is an incredibly risk-averse group of people within your organization. There's finance. In some companies, the chief financial officer manages financial risks with insurance and things like that. You may want to go to that person. IT, if you're separate from IT, which you should be in a decently sized organization, you may have allies over there that can help plead this case. And if you have the fortune of working in a software company like I do, that's sales driven, everything's about sales, sales always gets what they want. I'm a little bitter, can you tell? Sometimes security is a feature, especially now. All the data breaches in the news. Go talk to the sales, the chief of sales, whoever it may be, and say, hey, look, the CEO doesn't want to play ball on this budget item we've got, but here's how we could spend this to customers, saying we're doing X, Y, and Z for you, and you might close some extra sales because it's at the top of their mind. That's kind of a last-ditch scenario. Very rarely are security and sales in alignment, but when they are, you'll get what you need. So the underlying theme for all of this is just keep your security department in the context of the business. When we forget that we're a support role in the business. We have a protection role to the business, but it's about the business. When we forget that, that's when we get stonewalled by business leadership. We become the squeaky wheel that gets ignored and pushed off to the side, and that's when we stop getting anywhere. And my last point is always keep preaching. I entered on this in the beginning about how security is more important than compliance. Bring this up at every opportunity you get to address a business leader. They are paying more attention to security now, but a lot of business folks have this misguided idea that if we just check regulatory boxes, we're going to be okay. And it's our job as security professionals in our own little corners of the world to dispense with that idea as quickly and as severely as possible. You can bring up examples whenever high tech rolled out the last time. If your business had to spend a lot of money, you're in healthcare, and you had to spend money enacting all these controls that was required by high tech, you could point out to a business leader, hey, had we been focused on a security first mindset, we would not have had to do all of this stuff because we would have already had it. The regulatory frameworks are only getting more and more burdensome as governments try in vain to get zeroed in on security. They're never going to do it, but there's going to continue to be more and more rules. And so continue to sell the idea that investing in security is an investment against future costs that we're going to incur when the next regulation comes along. Because if we pay attention to our security first, in-depth security, there's a good chance we won't have to spend any money when the Office of Human Rights or when the PCI Council or whoever decides to just drop a whole new load of paperwork. So unfortunately, I don't want to take any more time. I've enjoyed talking with you. We do have about technically 5, but really 15 minutes if there's any questions, comments, scenarios you want to paint and see if I can pull them out like a puzzle. I probably can't, but I'm up for a challenge. Nobody? All of you have something that executive management right now is telling you can't have and you think you need. And you probably, I say you think, I don't mean to be denigrating, you probably actually need it, but they don't think so. So, nobody wants to share a story, maybe a big accomplishment, no group therapy. All right, well, I won't twist your arms. Oh, there's one. I will twist.
We always use, the damage you do to a brand. We had a major breach. Last few companies have got probably the likelihood on data breaches of stock. They really didn't take that move yet. So that angle no longer useful.
Right, so that angle can be. I use that angle all the time. Again, because a software company, we sell healthcare software, and customers that buy healthcare software are extremely concerned about the security reputation. So I point out, hey, we have a big data breach. We get on the HIPAA wall of shame. I show them how the Office of Civil Rights maintains this list of companies that have had major HIPAA breaches. Any of those you look through and you dig through that list and you find a technology company, if that breach was more than a year ago, everyone I've looked at, that technology company no longer exists. They're gone. So I use that ghost to haunt executives quite a bit. Again, with the insurance idea, if that applies in your case, then you use the insurance idea where homeowners insurance, you're unlikely to ever need it, but you can't afford to not have it. and you take it in that approach, that a data breach is just not tolerable to the business at all. But if you're a publicly traded company, you're not dealing in healthcare or I don't even want to say finance, because one of those companies you're referring to is a financial firm. Stock prices, I've noticed that too, don't seem to take much of a hit. People don't switch their bank. When you get a letter in the mail from your bank saying, hey, we had a data breach and here's your new card, please call us if you have any identity theft, and people don't run out and go to a different bank. So I think it's hit or miss with that particular theme. I'm fortunate enough to be in an organization where it's very much hit in the middle with that. So I'm glad you said that, because right when you said it, my boss is sitting over here and he was giving me the look, like, why didn't you bring that up? But very good point. Thank you. If there's nothing else, you guys are free to move on to your next session. I'll be hanging around if anybody wants to have a chat or ask any personal questions. Personal, like, that you don't want to share with anybody. Thanks.